Hello and welcome to the Self Love Witch podcast. It is your host, Kim. If you are new here, welcome. This is where we discuss all things divine femininity, womanhood, intentional living, and soft life. So, today's topic, I am discussing the pleasure principle. This completely encompasses soft living. It is something that I have been trying to adopt into my life ever since I learned about it and just tuning in whichever types of ways that I can on a daily basis because it is literally that powerful, right? So the pleasure principle, let's look at it like this. How can I always pinpoint my pleasure in any given moment? How do I allow my pleasure to be the center of my life? Now, I know as women, we are always told we are to be the nurturers, we are to be of service of everyone. Our needs, if they are put first, are most likely selfish, self-serving, and hold no purpose. Pretty much. That's what we're taught, right? But I want to change the narrative on that, and I feel like they didn't want us as women to truly understand this concept because men do it every day. Men do it every single day. You ask a man what he's doing, he said things that please me. Am I lying? No, but when you ask a woman, 9 times out of 10, they're doing something or being something for someone else, whether they're a mother, a wife, a grandmother, an aunt, etc. I feel like women, we always are carriers of being a safe space or a help to someone else. I want us to understand that that is okay, but your pleasure and your joy also needs to be a priority for you. If you are a woman that is trying to break that compass of trying to be there for everyone, trying to be that pillar in everyone's life, then this is for you. Because trust me, girl, I get it. Okay. As the eldest sibling, I get it. I completely get it. Also being the daughter of 2 disabled parents, I get it. When you are taught as a young woman that you have to always consider others and place others before yourself, it puts you in a position where as you get older, you can't even decipher what is something that brings you joy versus if it's something that feels good to you simply because that's what you were taught to adapt to feel good about yourself. For me personally, I always got compliments about how mature I was. That was simply because they knew they were putting way too much on me and they wanted to give me that boost to feel like, don't let it overwhelm you. Like, you got this. You're very mature for your age. You surpass a lot of other children. You have this mental capacity that others don't. So your load is meant for you. This is what God wanted for you, right? So first they do that. Then they sit and tell you, be somebody that can take care of others. Whatever you want to go for when it comes to your career, whatever you want to go for, whatever you want to do, just make sure that you can circle back and feed the people behind you, right? To each its own. But when it becomes unfair and when a lot of pressure is put on one child or one person or one woman throughout her life, it just creates a domino effect of feeling like they must always be thinking of others before themselves. And that is where a lot of women lose sight of what pleasure is to them, what joy means to them, and what their purpose is. So we have those two things, right? Then we have the concept of when we finally wake up, right? And we're kind of having an epiphany. We're like, oh my God, hold on. Like, who am I? What do I even like? Like, what brings me joy without feeling like this is something that should feel good simply because of how it can impact others? When we're always trying to be of service to others and we're not aiming to be of service to ourselves as well, that's where we really mess up and miss the plot completely. So the pleasure principle I feel like comes into a great stance when you can really analyze it from a space of realizing that it's not a bad thing to sit and assess what brings you joy and to be selfish. There's nothing wrong with being selfish. Selfish and evil, or people combine selfish and evil hand in hand. Like, am I gonna sit here and let someone starve? Absolutely not. But am I gonna sit here and let myself starve too, just to help you out, and not like I'm out for myself too? No. And that person should not want you to be starving and figuring out how you're gonna make things work for yourself either. There comes a point in time where, when you get into this mindset of wanting to make sure that things are reciprocal, not only with the joy that you bring others, but with the joy that you bring yourself, that is when you realize that love and friendships and connection, human connection, was always meant to be reciprocal. And I mean that when we're talking adult to adult. I mean that when I'm not discussing mother and child, father and son. I'm not talking about those things, because if you speak to the wrong audience, they'll start thinking you're saying like, oh, we'll get on the whole mother and father wound situations, because I do feel like there are parents that definitely expect way too much out of their children, and it creates mentally messed up adults in the end, and they don't know how to decipher who they are for themselves, and they're just not given a fair shot at life, especially when you're having to always carry someone else, right? So the whole concept of the pleasure principle, and when it comes to just realizing that things need to be reciprocal, it helps you realize that reciprocity is the starting point for the complete starting point for a life that allows you to identify what feels good for you. Boundaries, all in all, are top tier. The boundaries will forever be the greatest concept of humankind. The greatest concept of humankind. Because if you don't have boundaries, you know what's going to happen. You're going to have people using and abusing your empathy, using and abusing your presence, using and abusing your knowledge, your intellect, just everything. You have to have boundaries, because everyone does not have good intentions. You can have a heart of gold, but when you are around people that abuse boundaries and abuse people, period, and I want to keep it real with you guys, abuse isn't just physical, and it's not just emotional, and it's not just mental. There is spiritual abuse. There is energetic abuse. There are so many forms of abuse that we sometimes can't identify, especially if we don't have proper boundaries and we don't assess our boundaries on a consistent basis. Because my boundaries a year ago are completely different from my boundaries now, and that's because I had to check in with myself and be like, what do I need now? Because we're ever evolving, right? So our boundaries are always shifting, always changing, always shifting with the seasons, and that's how they should. And don't ever feel bad about having to switch those up, right? So the pleasure principle. When we assess our boundaries, we're then able to assess what feels good and what does not. What feels good and what does not. So when it comes to what feels good and what does not, after we assess our boundaries and we're able to tune into our bodies and we're able to assess, how does this make me feel? How does that person make me feel? How does this activity make me feel? How much joy do I feel when I do this? What kind of feelings arise for me when I'm in this situation? When we start to assess that, that's when we should start to make a list, a mental list. It can even be a physical list. When we start assessing, how do I feel when I do these certain things? How do I feel around these certain people? How do I feel in these type of environments? How do I feel around these kind of individuals, right? So When you really start to sit down and look at your list and you peep the commonalities in the feelings and the emotions and the energy and the way it affects your aura, the way that it affects your day, when you start to assess those things, that is when you can completely define what is bringing you a source of joy and what is not. And so that list, that very list that brings you that much joy, that much pleasure, those are the things that I want you to focus on, because those are the things that are bringing you pleasure. When people hear pleasure, they think of sexual things, they think of sensual things, and you can very well make it that way. But I'm talking about daily living right now. And of course that's incorporated, but I'm talking about day-to-day interactions, activities, environments, etc. But we're going to get into that too. But when we look at those aspects of life and we're like, okay, these things are the things that really make me feel good about myself. These are things that really make me feel inspired, really make me feel on top of the world, like I'm in my power as a woman. Those are the things that you need to incorporate into your daily life, period. Those are your non-negotiable standards. Those are your non-negotiable sources of pleasure. Now, when we're talking about the pleasure principle, we're talking about adapting this into our daily lives. So when you assess these certain emotions that you feel, you want to continue to strive to keep those emotions and those feelings and those energies continuous, right? So when you already have your boundaries set up and you already know what things are giving you sources of pleasure, that is when you can really start going full force. For me, for example, one thing that brings me, immense pleasure is going to bookstores. Going to museums, going anywhere that's mentally stimulating and where I can learn new information, because I just love to read, I love to learn, all of that. These aren't even all of my books back here. I'm still unpacking the rest of my books. I have an immense amount of books. And I don't hardly read anything that's just not informational. And I'm trying to work on that, but I just love learning factual information. So knowing that, I know that, okay, I love to learn, I love to be in spaces where I'm mentally stimulated. So I like to make sure that I am always 9 times out of 10 in mentally stimulating environments, around mentally stimulating people. That keeps me on a high. That keeps my energy up here. So that means that when I'm in a good, consistent energy, that means like other things that benefit and complement that energy will come to me. Because we're always going to talk about the law of attraction here, because it's very real. You know, what you embody is what you will become and what you will attract. Always. But people have to understand you have to embody it first. But before you can embody, you have to study yourself. And you can't be tired of being a student of yourself. You need to always be a student and to enjoy being a student. Because especially as a woman, you know, we're never going to be done learning. We're never going to be done learning. We go through so many different stages of life. Maiden, mother, crone. We go through so many different stages of life that we just will never be done learning. We're so expansive. We're so amazing, you know, and there's just so much we're going to be having to learn. So we just need to fall in love with learning ourselves and self-exploration, right? So when we stay in this pleasure type of energy and we just stay in that, we continuously every day, if we just wake up and we're like, okay, let me tap into my body. Let me feel my emotions. How am I feeling about this situation? What's going on right now? How do I switch this to where I can be in a state of pleasure, in a state of joy, in a state of peace? Those check-ins change your life. They change your life. And if you don't believe me, I'll give you a story time. Where do I begin? So, I'm not going to give out any names because personally they don't deserve this. They don't deserve any type of recognition or acknowledgement. But I want to discuss how I was dating someone, and this was around the time when I was really starting to dive deep into my self exploration and just figuring out what brought me joy, what kept me in touch with my body, what kept me waking up with a fire in my belly to just go for everything that I enjoyed in life and to just envision that everything was possible, right? And I will say that in the beginning, when I met this person, I was not in a space where I was privy to the law of attraction that well. I feel like I was aware of what it was. I was aware of how important it was to attract like-minded individuals and be around like-minded individuals. But I felt like when it came to dating, I was pretty blinded. I was pretty blinded by lust, by physical attraction, by good times. I was completely blinded to that. Not no more though. But I just remember that when I was getting into that energy, when I was figuring out like, okay, I'm figuring these things out, I noticed that the more that I dive deeper into exploring myself, into figuring out what pleasure meant to me and tuning into myself, I completely realized how much me and this person did not align. This person was, and I'm not trying to talk mess about the person, but I mean, they were not a good person. They were not a good person. They were very ego driven, very insecure, very verbally abusive, very condescending. Everything I was not. Everything I was not. Very sneaky, unfaithful, very sneaky individual. And it got to a point where we were having discussions and issues every day. And it got to a point where I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing? I am sitting here trying to get into this version of myself that embodies peace, embodies pleasure, embodies joy, embodies her best self. And I'm sitting here going back and forth with a person that can't even assess who they are aside from what social media tells them. We were just two different types of people. Two different types of people that just value completely different things. And the longer that I ignored it, the longer and harder it became to keep joy alive in my life. And it got pretty bad, y'all. It got pretty bad. Like I got to the spot and the time that really got me to a space where I was like, this is not it, was when I recognized that I was continuing a cycle that I saw within my own household growing up. And when you're young and you see things when you're a child, you're just like, oh, I'm never letting nobody treat me like that, or I'm never. But when it got to a point when I realized, oh my God, it's happening. And I had so much empathy for the women that I grew up with, because I realized how easy it is to not truly notice until you don't even realize that you are in a very toxic and abusive situation until you kind of break. And by that time, you really need the help of your community, because you can get weak to a point where you don't even know how to pick yourself up. So when I was able to notice, thankfully I did have people around that were like, hey, and thank God for that, because there are people who don't even have that. And I just want to sit here and say, if this is you, consider this your community, consider me your community, and I want you to choose yourself. I want you to choose yourself, no matter how that may look, no matter how it may come off to anybody. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to adopting the pleasure principle, when it comes to adopting the principle of choosing your joy and choosing your peace first, you can do no wrong. But when you realize that something is not in alignment with that, it is our responsibility to cut ties with that. And it does hurt. It is not always peaceful. And it's not always smooth sailing. And unfortunately, some people get into very harmful situations, some that even take their lives. It gets really that deep, and I'm praying that if that's a situation with anybody here listening today, that you reach out to hotlines, to your community, to law enforcement, and get yourself out of that, because you deserve way better. Way, way, way better. And you can have it. You really can. Because one thing I did learn throughout all of that was that once you make that decision, once you make it up in your mind, they're like, okay, you know what? No, this is not who I am. This is not what I am. This may have been something I wanted a few months ago. This is not what I want for myself now. You get strict about it. I'm telling you. And when I left that situation, and in about 2 months, I met the person that I'm with now, and they are amazing. Amazing. And I knew that I called that person in intentionally because I did rituals for it. I did rituals not for love, but rituals for myself. Rituals to attract that real, genuine, connection that empowered me, that uplifted me, that loved me, that supported everything that I am and that I plan to be and that I am becoming. And that's how I know that if you put your pleasure and you put your peace and that feeling of safety in a safe, regulated nervous system, if you make that your priority and you center that and you decenter everything else, you don't know how good it's going to get. It gets good. It gets good. And it gets good because when you have that healthy mindset and it's continuous, can you imagine how much you can get done? Not even done. Because I don't equate productivity with purpose. But when you realize how beautiful life becomes when you can wake up every day and you feel inspired and you feel empowered in your vessel and you feel empowered in your womanhood and you feel empowered in who you are, you're unstoppable, babe. Unstoppable. You can't be stopped. You can't be stopped. And that is why the pleasure principle is such a beautiful concept to adopt into your daily life. And I just really hope that this touches someone, and I really hope that it helps someone just figure out what that means for you and figure out how you can really, really tune into yourself and tune out of that mess and decenter everything else and center you. So that's all for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the Self-Help Witch podcast. Until next time. Peace.